Here's an episode of How to Analyse Poetry from the Learning Cauldron. Today, we'll be looking at Liz Lochhead's poem, Box Room. Analysing poetry involves identifying and dissecting the literary techniques that the poet has used effectively to explore the theme or themes of a poem. In her poem, Box Room, Liz Lochhead explores the themes of relationships of women, passing of time, isolation, and families. The title of the poem, Box Room, is interesting. A box room has connotations of being a place for useless or old things that are no longer required, and that is important when we consider the content of the poem. When you're writing box room, you might want to say the eponymous box room, which means the box room mentioned in the title. Just a handy word for you to know. The first stanza begins with 3 short minor sentences, which creates a slightly fractured feel. First, the welcoming, which should be reassuring and positive, but then the caesura brings that to a dramatic close. Smiles all round, but this feels slightly superficial. And then a space for handshakes with a slightly sinister sibilance to it, which hints at an awkward silence after they've all shaken hands. The word then is important because there's a sudden change here, a sudden harshness. Then she put me, first person voice, in my place. And there's a lovely play on words here because to put someone in their place can mean to show that you are superior to them, but quite literally, the hostess has shown the persona in the poem to the box room where she is going to be staying during her visit. The use of brackets here, parenthesis, includes a personal aside from the persona, and there's a hint of irony here. Oh, with concern for my comfort, and this is highlighted by the alliteration of the hard k sound with concern and comfort, not the one in the middle, which isn't involved. Then moving on, there is an enjambment where it runs over the end of the line. This room was always his, and the his refers to the persona's boyfriend, who happens to be the son of the hostess. And there seems to be almost a rivalry between the two of them as to who is superior in his affections. It's he comes home, it's here for him. He is obviously a focus here. It's interesting to note that the poet gives the word friend, a capital F here, and this is to show that it's said in a certain way by the mother. He brings a friend. And here she's trying to undermine the relationship between the persona in the poem and her son. When she smiles and says, I hope the bed is soft enough, one has the feeling that there's an insincerity running through the things that she says. The idea that the young man will make do tonight suggests that the persona is causing the woman's son discomfort by being there and him having to sleep somewhere else. But also there's a connotation with make do that perhaps the girl isn't good enough for him. Moving forward, we have enjambment here, all right for a night or two, emphasising no longer. And then she has to get another little dig in, although she's being perfectly civil on the surface, once or twice before he slept there, indicating to the visitor that she's not the first. The I'm sure smacks of insincerity once again. So whilst she is saying all the right things, this hostess is subtly undermining her guest. The boyfriend's mother then departs, leaving the persona piece to unpack, and the use of the consonants of P's here, a short staccato sound, somehow creates the feeling that she will not have any mental peace because she's already worried about her position here. The description of the suitcase is interesting. The word choice here of synthetic hints at the fact that it is not real, just like the feigned friendliness of the mother. Note also the use of the structure of parenthesis here, another little aside from her as she describes the suitcase, and it reminds us this is an inanimate object with which she is left alone in the box room. The imagery of the pathetic shrine to your lost boyhood is very effective here. A shrine is somewhere that you worship someone, and it implies that the mother worships her son so much that she's almost created a shrine to his childhood in this box room full of his possessions. She, that's a rather impersonal reference to the hostess, must think she can brush off time with dust. Note the sibilance here, almost like the sound of the dust being dusted off the objects. The persona is feeling uneasy. She tries to laugh off this feeling to try and protect herself, but she does feel threatened. She's trying to be strong, but it isn't easy in the face of this rather hostile reception. She's come for a weekend, hoping to indicate that this relationship between the woman's son and herself is a long-term one, but she is certainly left feeling that it might not be. There's a contrast there between weekend, the word choice of, and the word choice of permanence. The use of the first person voice here, I, makes this feel a very personal experience, and so we as readers feel sympathy for her. She is obviously feeling vulnerable and defensive. The second stanza starts with a repeated phrase from the previous one, piece to unpack, and again that short P sound emphasises the fact that she does not feel any peace. And that is continued, this idea is continued with the hesitation of the dash there, and but I found none enjoyment in this spare room, emphasising the word none there. She is feeling extremely restless and uneasy here. The word choice of spare room is interesting because spare suggests non-essential, not necessary, and she's beginning to wonder if that's what she is. And here she's addressing her lover, which once contained you. It's interesting here that the word done appears at the end of this line to emphasise it. And dun is a sort of dreary, bland colour, suggesting that his life wasn't very exciting as a child. Dun-coloured walls. And again, one small window. This gives the idea that his life earlier was a sort of restricted one and he didn't have very many big ideas for his future. This used to frame your old horizons, she said. So there is a small window, that's the literal sense, but there's also a metaphorical sense of the idea that he used to be restricted, possibly by his controlling mother. What can I blame for my unrest? This word choice immediately sums up what we've already perceived ourselves in the fact that she is not feeling comfortable in this place. And the question here adds to her tone of uncertainty. Persistent fear, another enjambment to emphasise the word fear here at the end. And this is a great example of personification. Fear is so vivid that it's like a person literally digging her in the ribs, so making her aware of it. It elbows me, embedded deeply here, and all these sounds, the assonance, helps to really ram this image home. The reference to an outgrown bed is just another example of something in this box room which is no longer useful or necessary. Then there's yet another example of parenthesis, narrow but no narrower than the single bed we sometimes share. Now, there's a lot to say about this aspect. The repetition of the N emphasises the fact that, yes, the bed is small, it's a single bed, but we, and this is a reference to both of them, but they're not together at the moment, she's on her own, they sometimes share a single bed, and the point is that they could have shared this bed because it's no narrower than one that they sometimes share, and yet they're not, making her feel even more alone. On this next line, there's an interesting use of alliteration of G's here, a harsh G sound, describing what he looks like in the photos from his youth. Grin, gilt-edged. Gilt is a colour of gold, often surrounding photos, and somehow it sounds a little bit sinister, you grin, gilt-edged. It's almost like ghosts of his past, long discarded selves, as the poet says. So these are previous versions or incarnations of him in these photos, and she's worried in case she might become part of his past as well. And this is emphasised here with this but in yet another set of parentheses. Where do I fit into the picture? Another question highlighting her uncertainty here. And there's a play on words too. She's talking about pictures, so that's literal. She's thinking, I'm not in any of these pictures. And also there's the concept of fit into the picture as meaning belonging. And she is beginning to question whether she does belong in his life. Then we have another alliteration highlighting another interesting phrase, previous prizes. So we see perhaps his trophies from swimming or whatever he's done in his youth, and she's beginning to think that maybe she's just another prize that he's bagged and will be put aside in somewhere like a box room where they're no longer useful. And a selection of plots grown thin. This is an interesting use of imagery as well. The idea that she's no longer part of the storyline that she's involved in might be coming to an end. After the caesura, which follows thin, we move on to a heavily punctuated part of the poem. She reflects on the egg collection that her boyfriend has put together when he was a boy, and it shatters her. The word choice of shatters is strong here. It's clever because it's a pun in connection with the eggshells, but also it shows that it has deeply disturbed her. And there's a pause, and then we have more parenthesis, and in this case it's not a personal aside, it's actually a list of all the types of birds' eggs that he had gathered, and this emphasises the number of them, and obviously he'd been quite careful about it and diligent. They're carefully labelled, but then this sucked dry implies that things that he's used in the past are just cast aside when they're no longer any use. And it's also a rather strange connotation because the symbolism of eggs is of fertility and perhaps them having children in the future, and somehow she's getting the feeling that this just might not happen anymore. Equally disturbing is the fact that he claims that he has no interest in these anymore, and yet they were obviously something that was important to him. And where does that put her, she wonders. Another use of parenthesis here, this time for a personal aside. You just took one from each. You never wrecked a nest. And then on to the next line, you said. And the positioning here of you said suggests that she's not sure she actually believes him, and it calls into doubt all the things that she thinks she has known about her boyfriend before. The word choice of invited guest among abandoned objects, which means cast-offs, suggests that although she's been invited to this house, she does not feel welcome, and she's been placed with things that are no longer any use to her boyfriend, and that makes her feel very uneasy and probably unwanted. The use of alliteration here, my position is precarious. Precarious means that you're at risk, you're in danger, and it emphasises the fact that she now feels that her situation, which she thought was fairly secure, is perhaps not as safe as she thought it was. Closeted, the word choice there has an idea of secrets attached to it, and therefore she probably wonders what else she doesn't know about this man that she is having a relationship with. The word choice of dark helps to establish the mood here, one of which is subdued, as she becomes steadily more depressed and negative about the relationship. Another set of alliteration here with P, past a premonition. So the things that she's discovered about his life in the past suddenly become quite relevant for her future, and she almost predicts that things might not be the way she hoped they would be as they go forward. Can't close, another alliteration here. We begin to get a sense of her despair here. She can't unsee the things she's seen, and it has made her think quite seriously. The result of this is that she shivers, and she's not cold because we learn, if we go on over that enjambment, that there is an electric blanket, which is an artificial source of heat, not like the human warmth that she might get from a relationship. And the word choice here of deceptive emphasises that all in this poem is not what it seems or what it seemed. It means that perhaps she has somehow been deceived by the superficial welcome that the mother has given her, but also perhaps deceived in some way by her boyfriend because she is discovering aspects of his personality and his past that she had not been aware of and which make her begin to question their relationship. The reader is left feeling rather sympathetic for the persona in this poem by the end. She's come to the house expecting to be welcomed and thinking that she is part of her partner's long-term plans, but after her experience of being put in the box room, she begins to doubt their whole relationship, and we end with her feeling that there really isn't much hope. It's rather bleak at the end. The rhyme scheme of the poem is quite consistent apart from one place. It's in rhyming couplets apart from these two lines here where it slightly varies. In an outgrown bed, narrow but no narrower than the single bed we sometimes share. Doesn't quite work, and that shows the unease that she begins to feel at this part in the poem. The form of the poem is a dramatic monologue. It's spoken in first-person voice right the way through, and there are frequent parentheses which are used both to add personal asides and also for additional information. The tone of the poem varies throughout, and there are frequent changes from ironic to critical to defensive to uneasy and ultimately to fearful and uncertain. I hope that's been helpful. See you next time. In other videos, we analyse more of Liz Lochhead's poems. If you found this or any of our other videos useful, it would be great if you could subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thanks for your support.